Welcome to Gospel Truth with Andrew Wommack, celebrating 50 years of sharing God's unconditional love and grace. And now, Andrew continues teaching from the life-changing Word of God about Don't Limit God.
Welcome to our Friday's broadcast of the Gospel Truth. This is the end of my second week teaching on Don't Limit God. And I tell you, this has got me all stirred up. This is something that God spoke to me January the 31st, 2002, and it's changed my life. And you know what? It wasn't just then. He has spoken this to me dozens of times since, and just in the last week, God spoke to me about don't limit Him. I've said this in the past. I won't go into the detail, but in 2018, the Lord is just showing me that this is going to be one of the banner years for this ministry. We're going to grow. We're going to increase. I don't even know what's going to happen yet, but I know it's going to be big. And I mean, we've had some really big things happen. Even in 2017, we saw probably the largest growth that we have ever seen in this ministry. And God is telling me 2018 is going to be bigger. And so what I'm saying is God didn't just speak this to me 15, 16 years ago. He spoke this to me last week. I believe He's going to be speaking to me the rest of my life to keep believing bigger. And so this is what we've been talking about. I've got this teaching, Don't Limit God. The subtitle is Imagine Yourself Successful. It's going to be next week or the week after before I actually get to talking about imagination. But once I get into that, I tell you, this is going to be life-changing. It's changed my life, and I know it will help you. So I've been talking about reasons why I was limiting God, thinking small. Part of it was laziness because we had just reached a place where things were working so good. I was wanting to kick back and not stretch myself anymore. I was just wanting to be lazy. That's one of the problems. And then I talked about a fear of change. I talked about a fear of the unknown. I talked about a fear of failure. And I'm going to end up on that today, and then next week we're going to go into talking about some other things, some things that I think will surprise you and that many of you will relate to and didn't even realize that this was limiting God. But let me turn over to Matthew chapter 14, and this is where Jesus came to His disciples walking upon the water. They were in the midst of the sea. There was a terrible storm. The boat was full. It looked like they were going to sink. And in the midst of this crisis situation, Jesus just comes walking to them on top of the very thing that was about to destroy them. And you know, some people take offense when I say this, but I think that if we looked at things from God's standpoint, just like Jesus was walking on top of this storm that was killing them. And what that ministers to me is that Jesus is so awesome. He is so in control that the thing that is about to just crush you and you think that you're overwhelmed, it's no big deal to Jesus. Jesus just walked on top of the very thing that was about to kill these disciples. And I think it helps me when I understand that the things that bother me so much and they look so big to me, they are inconsequential to God. The only reason He's even concerned about it is because it concerns you and because He loves you. But God is not overwhelmed with your problems. He came walking on top of the very thing that was about to kill them. And it says here in Matthew chapter 14, verse 25, And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw Him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, It is a spirit, and they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. Now think about this. If all Jesus was wanting to do was to have them be of good cheer and not be afraid, why didn't He just still the storm? Why did He tell them to not be afraid and to be of good cheer before the problem was solved instead of after it? Why didn't He just solve the problem, and then wouldn't they have been of good cheer and not have been afraid anymore? See, this is the way we want it to be. We cry out to God, oh God, change the situation, and we come to Him with all of our fear and with all of our doubt and with all of our unbelief. But the Lord says to you, you be of good cheer and don't let your heart be troubled before the situation is changed. You know what that is? That's faith. You need to respond in faith. God needs some act of faith because it happens according to the power that works in us. Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20. God is able to do exceeding abundantly above all we ask or think. It says, according to the power that works in us. If there isn't any faith working on the inside of you, God can't move. I know some people take offense and say, oh, God can do anything. Well, you could say God won't move. You can say it any way you want to. I'm telling you, until you take some act of faith, things aren't going to work. It's not because God doesn't have the power, but God has delegated authority to us, and until we act in faith, God can't or won't, will not, whatever you want to say, it's not going to happen until there's an expression of faith on your part. We need to believe God. So He told them, be of good cheer. Instead of solving their problem and then say, now are you of good cheer? No, He told them to be of good cheer in advance. That's faith. And then in verse 28 it says, Peter answered Him and said, Lord, if it be Thou, bid me come unto Thee on the water. And look at the Lord. He said, come. Did you know that this word come would have worked for all of the disciples? But there's only one disciple, Peter, that got out of the boat and walked on the water. And boy, some of the things in this story are exactly what I've been talking about. Yesterday I spent quite a bit of time talking about a fear of failure. People knowing that God's wanting them to do something, but they're afraid of failure. They're afraid to get out of the boat. But look at it this way. It says that the boat was now full of water. They were afraid that they were going to drown. Did you know, if you looked at this thing logically and took your emotions out of it, there was very little difference in being outside of the boat in the water and being in the boat. The boat was full of water. It was going down. They were going to drown if they just stayed in the boat. How long were they going to sit there until they died? You know, I used this yesterday out of 2 Kings chapter 7, these 4 leprous men. How long are we going to sit here? Until we die? If we stay here, we're going to die. If we go into the city, we're going to die. Let's go out to the enemy. The worst they could do is kill us. You know, that's impeccable logic. But most people are too emotional to think, oh, they could kill me. Well, you're going to die if you don't do something. You got to do something. You got to take risk. You got to get over a fear of risk and wanting everything to be risk-free. Christian living is risky living. Trusting God is risky living. These guys that were in the boat, if they would have been thinking logically and not emotionally, they wouldn't have been holding on to that boat, because that boat was not going to save them. They would have gone down if it hadn't have been for what Jesus did. There was very little difference between being in the boat and being out of the boat. It was going to take a miracle. Peter made the right decision to get out of the boat. Everybody wants this miracle. Everybody would love to stand up and say, man, through Jesus, I've walked on water, but you're afraid to get out of the boat. Did you know you aren't going to experience a miracle until you get out of the boat, until you do something different than what everybody else has done? Everybody is wanting different results than what the world is getting, but they don't want to do anything differently. I think it was Einstein that says it's a definition of insanity to want something different and yet be afraid to do anything different. If you keep doing the same thing, you're going to get the same results. If you stay in the boat, you're never going to see the miracle of walking on the water. And yet people are just so afraid to step out. I'm telling you, you've got to get beyond this. You got to get beyond a fear of failure and recognize that, man, I am going to get out of this boat. I'm not going to be like everybody else. It's amazing to me I was driving recently and I drove by a pasture, and this was when it was warm, and I drove by a pasture and there must have been 20 or 30 cows, and they were all huddled together. You couldn't have stood in between any of them. They had this huge pasture, and yet, they're just a herd. They have a herd mentality and they stay together. I've heard stories. I've never worked with sheep, but I've heard stories that sheep, just follow the leader and stuff, and that if the leader was to walk off a cliff, the rest of them will just walk right after him and fall off the cliff. It's this herd mentality. And I'm amazed at how people have that same thing. We just follow the crowd. We do what everybody else does, and yet we all want to be individuals. And if somebody groups us and say, that you're in this ethnic group, that you're in this poverty level, we resist all of that. No, I'm an individual, and we claim that we're individuals, and yet we have this herd mentality, and we're afraid to do anything that is different than what everybody else is doing. We want to be just kind of in the middle. You know what being in the middle is? Average. It's just being mediocre. You aren't the best, you aren't the worst. And yet this is where most people live. They just have this herd mentality and want to be like everybody else. And yet they want supernatural results. I'm telling you, if you are going to want different results, you're going to have to do something differently. And I tell our people, when I'm talking to them about coming to Bible college is just one of those things that you can do that I guarantee you is going to turn your life in a different direction. For you to unplug, to leave your home, to leave your job, to leave your friends, your security, and everything that's normal, and come to a place and just sit under the Word 4 hours a day, I guarantee you it is a life-changing experience. And if you want something different, then do something different. You keep doing the same thing, you're going to get the same results. I'm thinking about a woman right now, Nicola Appleby, and I've been going to Charlotte, North Carolina for, I think it's 32 or 33 years. And Nicola and her mom lived over in Winston-Salem, and they would come over to Charlotte for these meetings every year. And anyway, Nicola, she had a job in a law firm, was making a lot of money. She just, successful in a lot of ways, but every year she would talk to me and the director of our Bible college when we were out there, and she just felt like she should come to Charis Bible College. And yet she was afraid to do so for a number of reasons, not only her job and stuff, but her mother. She lived with her mother. Her mother was dependent upon her, and they shared the rent together. And there was just a number of different things. But every year she would come and talk to us. And finally, I remember telling her just exactly what we said yesterday on our program out of 2 Kings chapter 7. And I said, how long are you going to sit here until you die? Are we going to have this same conversation next year? Are you going to be talking about you wished you could come, but you won't change, but you don't want to change anything that you're doing? And finally, Nicola made that step. And she left North Carolina, came out to Colorado. I don't remember all the details, but I think that her business liked her. I forgot exactly how this worked, but she got a job that was comparable to what she had. I think it was even a better job. Things worked better here. She got on fire. She went to Russia. And she was in our school for a period of time as one of our instructors, and then she separated and started doing her own orphanage ministry and things like this. And Nicola, for the last probably decade or more, has been traveling the world, speaks fluent Russian. God has used her, and she just this last year got married, found her husband. She was, I forget how old, but probably in her 40s, and had never been married. And her life has just turned around, and God is blessing her and using her, and great things are happening. And it all started with her getting out of the boat. If you want to walk on water, you're going to have to overcome the fear of getting out of the boat. You're going to have to quit doing things just like everybody else has done. Just because your family has done it this way for years and they're all telling you that you're crazy, you got to do what God has told you to do. I tell you, what I'm saying is so powerful. It's simple, but it's powerful. And the average person misses it because, again, this herd mentality. We're just afraid to break out. We're afraid to do something different. You don't like what you're having experienced. You don't want to be like everybody else. You don't want to be just mediocre. You want to be different, but you don't want to do anything differently. That's not how it works. You're going to have to take a step of faith. You're going to have to get over being afraid of failure. So Peter, he got out of the boat and he walked on the water to go to Jesus. And in the next verse it says, but when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. Did you know, as long as he was looking at Jesus, the author and the finisher of his faith, Hebrews chapter 12, he was able to walk on water. He was able to do the impossible. He was able to do things that he could not do in himself because of faith, because he had a word from God. One word, 4 letters in the English language, come, was enough to do a miracle. All you need is a word from God and to step out of the boat and start doing it, and you can do the impossible. You can do things that you couldn't do by yourself. I'm telling you, if your life isn't supernatural, it's superficial. Man, that's powerful. If your life isn't supernatural, it's superficial. You ought to be living a supernatural life. You ought to be able to look and say, man, God is awesome in my life. And there's a lot of people watching this program that you can't say that. You've never gotten out of the boat, and yet you would love to have this testimony. You're going to have to get out of the boat, and you're going to have to keep your eyes on Jesus instead of everything else around you. Did you know when you start following God, it's not going to look good at first? I don't know all the reasons for this. I'm not sure that I can explain that, but I'm telling you, in my own life, God put this vision on the inside of me of reaching the world. And I didn't have a clear vision. I wasn't sure it was television, but I knew that I was going to reach people all over the world. I knew that I was going to have a large ministry, one of the largest ministries in the world, and I was going to reach people. And I believed this from the day one when God touched my life. But did you know that immediately it didn't happen? The very first thing that happened is God told me to quit school. I was in college and I got drafted and sent to Vietnam and sat in a bunker in Vietnam for 13 months. And then I started being a youth director in a little church. Then I pastored 3 little churches, and it was over a decade later that, you know what, I still had this vision of reaching the world, and yet nobody else saw it. And there wasn't any proof of it. I even had relatives. I had people who loved me that meant well, who came up, and every time they talked to me, they basically were saying something like, you know what, you ought to try something different. This isn't working. There was no proof of it. I didn't have the finances. People were staying away from my meetings by the thousands. There was not any physical proof that God was ever going to use me and that I was ever going to touch people all over the world. It looked like I couldn't even get out of town. But I had this vision. And you know how I survived? I kept looking, kept my eyes on Jesus, the author and the finisher of my faith. It's like Peter walking on the water. As long as he looked at Jesus, everything was fine. But when he took his eyes off of Jesus and looked at the circumstances did not bear witness with what he was doing. Did you know that it says when he saw the wind and the waves boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. When he saw the wind and the waves, what did the wind and the waves have to do with him walking on the water? Nothing. He couldn't have walked on the water if it had been a perfectly calm day. But did you know what the wind and the waves did? It took his attention off of Jesus. He got to see in a storm. It put fear in him. He got to realize, he got to thinking about, I'm out here in the middle of a lake, standing on the water. And when he got back into his natural mind, into his own reasoning, when he took his eyes off of Jesus and just started looking at things in the natural, he began to sink. And I'm telling you, this is the exact same thing for us. If I would have, during that first decade after God called me to minister, if I would have looked at things just in the natural, I would have sunk. I wouldn't have made it. I'd have quit. But you know what? I just kept looking at the vision. I kept looking at Jesus. I kept hearing His Word come, and I kept doing what God told me to do. And now, looking back 50 years later, by the time you see these programs, it'll be over 50 years since God called me to get out of the boat. And I look now, and God's blessing, God is just doing some awesome things in my life. I am so thankful for it. But did you know it all started with me getting out of the boat, and it didn't look good for a long period of time. I just had to keep my eyes on Jesus. And I'm still having to keep my eyes on Jesus, because in the natural, I could sink at any moment. In the natural, if God doesn't come through, I'm saying things, I'm headed in directions, I've made commitments that if God doesn't come through, I'm dead. But notice it says that he, beginning to sink, he cried out to the Lord. I think this is interesting. I've never seen anybody begin to sink in my life. Man, you know, if you were to step out of a boat and just step onto the water, you wouldn't begin to sink, you'd just sink. He began to sink, which means that he didn't just, go under the water all at once. He just gradually began to sink. And what's significant about that to me is that when you step out and start following the Lord, you don't fail all at once. You take your eyes off of Jesus, you just begin to sink. And if you would recognize that the moment fear starts coming in, the moment you just start using your logic instead of your faith, the moment you see this happen, if you would turn back to the Lord and put your attention back on Him, you won't sink. You may every once in a while recognize you're beginning to sink, but it is manageable. You don't have to be afraid of this. And what he did, he turned his attention to the Lord. And, the Lord didn't rebuke him and say, "You idiot, why didn't you trust me?" He did say, "Why, O ye of little faith, why did you doubt?" But he reached out his hand and he picked him up. And I can guarantee you, Jesus didn't put Peter on his back and carry him back to the boat, or he didn't put him in his arms and carry him back. He grabbed Peter and they both walked back to the boat. And then if you read this same account in John chapter 6, it says that when he entered into the boat, immediately the boat and all of the disciples were translated to the other side of the lake. It was just absolutely miraculous. He didn't just let Peter drown. He didn't rebuke him. He reached out and helped him. And I'm telling you that if you would just get over your fear of failure and get out of the boat and take a risk and start moving in that direction, you may not do everything right, but Jesus is right there. And if the moment you begin to start seeing failure, panic come in, unbelief, you just turn to the Lord, put your eyes back on Him, and I guarantee you, you'll make it to the other side. The Lord didn't tell these disciples, get into the boat and go halfway and drown. He said, no, get into the boat and go to the other side. And I'm telling you, whatever God has called you to do, He's not calling you out of Egypt so you can die in the wilderness. He's calling you out of Egypt so He can bring you into the promised land. He's told you to get out of the boat, not so that you can drown, but so that you can walk on water and reach the other side. I believe that Jesus is speaking to people through these programs and encouraging you to take the limits off, to start believing for big things. Let your imagination go. Sit down and think, if I didn't have money problems, if I wasn't disqualified through my lack of experience and skills, if it wasn't for the people who were criticizing me, just take all of the things that hinder you and sit down and say, what would I do if there were no limitations? If money was no object, skill was no object, people's opinion was no object, what would you do? There's some of you right now that know you have a dream in your heart, but you don't let it surface because you are letting money tell you it can't happen, people tell you it can't happen, your own failures tell you. You just need to put all of this aside. What would I do if there were no restrictions on me? And then when that vision becomes clear, just get out of the boat and go for it.